Thanks for playing along there, Jason.
Oh, Ian, no, do I have to go put my Cubs hat on now?
You have one. It's
Or
a
my-
good time to do it.
Yes,
my-
please. Please put the cup hat on. Giants, anything, please.
Yeah, we always do this, buddy. We always do this. And you have a lot to be proud of. Cubs are doing great. Welcome, everybody. My name is Ian Blackburn. I'm the host of Zoom into Wine. And every Wednesday night, we produce some Zoom content. And tonight, we're talking to my friend Jason Court, who's apparently a Cubs fan. And that's a good thing. We love to get great people involved in our Zooms, be able to learn, be able to experience some great new wines that maybe you haven't tried before. And this is going to be a great thing for all of us. We're going to taste. The concept of tonight is Jason is the winemaker of his own wine. It's called Evidence Wine. And he's got this, we're going to learn about his story here in just a moment. And then we're going to taste 3 wines from his lineup, the 2017, 2018, and 2019. These wines have received some nice critical acclaim, very close to perfect scores. And we want to basically learn, what does a perfect wine have involved? What is it about the wine that these folks found to be borderline perfect? What is perfect Cabernet? And, you might see a little difference in subtleties between these vintages. We also want to learn what was different about 17, what was different about 18, what was different about 2019. And so we'll do that tonight as we explore these Napa Valley wonders here that we've got in our glasses. Everybody that's on the Zoom, and there's quite a few people, Jason, that are not here tonight, but will be watching this video later. And we post this on our YouTube channel for further consumption. There's also a number of guests that purchase these kits that will be unable to attend tonight, but they're out there. We sold them all, and we have groups from all over the place joining us tonight. So we thank you guys for being here, and let's get started. Let's put some wine in our glass, and let me introduce you to my friend Jason Court. Hey, Jason, you're a Led Zeppelin fan, so we were on hold with Led Zeppelin and getting the mood set there. Was also going through some things, trying to get everything lined up. Now, Jason, you're using Coravin, putting a little wine in the glass. It's a great way to go, and we recommend Coravin very much. We broke out the bottles that we had into little tasting kits, and so those are now going in my glass here.
So I was wondering how you actually delivered the product. That's really cool.
Yeah, we fill them up to the top. It's like a nice slow decantation. We do it on Monday, and those get sent out via UPS and received either Tuesday or Wednesday. Let me get my bottles here, Jason. So why don't you introduce yourself, and let me do a little back of the house while you're doing that. Just tell people where you came from, how you got here, and what you're doing.
Parallels very similarly to what's going on right now. I'm a film industry guy that in the 2001 and 2002, all respective unions were going on strike. And my little side hustle as an actor was I owned these little cube trucks that I kitted out for art department and prop masters, like art directors and prop masters. And because as an actor, I found the most interesting people on film sets were grips and art department people, far more interesting than other actors usually. So I was my little side hustle. And when the industry in and of itself completely shut down, I didn't have a whole lot going on. I had a buddy of mine that I tended bar with in Chicago right after college. His name is Chris Carpenter. And we hit it off and became fast, famous friends at that moment in 1985.
Wow. Cool.
And both of us had a deep respect for food and booze and wine and all of the things that incorporate all those things. And most importantly, just bringing people together. So the long short of it is in 2002.
Jason, let me ask you, did you say that you were friends with Chris Carpenter, legendary winemaker in Napa Valley, in Chicago in 1985.
We were both collegiate athletes. We got out of school in 1985. We both wound up tending bar at an Irish bar on Division Street called Butch McGuire's. That's where we met. He was a
cool.
biochem major and played football. I was a theater major and ran track and played football. And we had great potluck dinners and great conversation. And he decided to go to Davis and do the viticultural and enological courses and learn how to make wine back in the day. And the long short of it is I was living in Los Angeles and visiting him as my friend over the years. And when he got out of Davis, we used to come up and visit in Napa and just was always really taken by just the process. But in 2002, when all of the unions were on strike and television production was in complete shutdown, he essentially threw a bone to me and asked if I had any interest in working a harvest at Cardinal, where he was just undertaking his first solo vintage as the winemaker there. And I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I just thought I'll grab my photography equipment, some clothes I'm willing to destroy, and go and have a cool experience and learn to make wine. And by mid-October, I was driving up Silverado Trail at 6:30 in the morning on my way into the cellar and became brutally aware of how alive and engaged and interested I felt in what I was doing. And the epiphany was pretty much started right there. I made an agreement with myself that if I felt the way I felt at that moment in December, when it was all over, I'd go back to LA, sell my place, move to Napa, and learn to make wine. And I took a $9 an hour job pushing pumps and hauling hoses and asking questions at Cardinal, which then went into La Jolla. And then they bought the La Jolla winery. And then I wound up living at the La Jolla winery for 4.5 years, where I autonomously began to utilize the fruit they were throwing away as garbage. And I made wine out of it. And also took over 5 rows of Zinfandel that they had up in the La Jolla, Rancho La Jolla up on top of Howell Mountain. That they just bestowed to me and gave me because they don't produce Zinfandel. So I started producing my own wine while I was working with them. And after 9 years, I met you with my first incarnation of Evidence, which was a Zinfandel-based brand. And I spent a few years learning how kind of not to do it. And when I decided to throw in the towel and consult winemaking for other people and give up having a brand, I literally got a phone call the next day with an opportunity to get in on this vineyard on Mount Veeder, which is the Bruadere vineyard, formerly known as the Conrad Vineyard, and jumped in and recreated Evidence as a label and an ultra premium wine brand, and decided to get into making Napa Valley Mount Veeder Cab instead of Lodi Zin. And that was in 2016. My first release was 2018, and here are the first 3. We're tasting them.
All right. So these wines that we're tasting are Mount Veeder single vineyard Cabernets, or are they collections of vineyards from Mount Veeder?
It is a single vineyard. There is 4 rows of Malbec. I have 4 rows of Malbec on this vineyard. That I utilize for Evidence. The percentages of the blend has varied dependent on the volume and the maturation rate. If they're in that, I have the first wine, which is the 2017. If you folks have started with that one, is actually a great example of what's referred to as a co-fermentation wine. So rather than complicate everything coming in at once, 2017 was a really interesting vintage. Borderline perfect, amazingly enough, with obviously no information ahead of time, harvested this fruit 2 days before the disastrous fires of 2017 that changed our world up here, quite frankly. So I lucked out in that regard, and everything was coming in all at once. I make the wine at Cardinal. So in order to simplify the fermentation process, then rather than, trying to manage two separate fermentations, the fruit was mature and ready at the same time. So I fermented it all together. It was also the first vintage that I utilized wild yeast, the native yeast that exists on the fruit. So it kind of changed the characteristic of the wine very much. I think that there's a virtue to co-fermentation that makes young wines more approachable earlier than I think they normally would be. If they're co-fermented with a varietal where the skin porosity is much less dense than, say, Cab, which is Petit Syrah, Malbec, Cab Franc are all grapes that have skin that will add great color and depth, and sort of spill the flavor onto the side of the palate instead of just moving front to back, which is the way most people sort of, scale or relate to what the flavor profile is. When we're lucky enough to utilize the kind of fruit that I'm using that comes off of Mount Veeder, that doesn't just go front to back. It spills off onto the sides and just really fattens up the complexity of that whole flavor spectrum that the wine is presented.
So Jason, let's just back up for a second. So we are tasting wine number 1, our first sample tonight, which is the 2017 Mount Veeder single vineyard. And what I caught that you said that you co-fermented all the red grape varieties together instead of managing the separate fermentations in 17, because everything was basically uniformly ripe at the same time, and it just made a lot of sense. How many tons of fruit are we talking about here? Is this like 4 tons, something like that total?
Yeah, I mean, it pretty much it's straight through the course. I made about 200 cases of each of these wines, so fairly, about 3 tons. Maybe three and change. The variables on all 3 of these vintages, 19, believe it or not, was actually one of the larger yields that I've had since I started this brand off of Mount Veeder. I typically make somewhere between 200 and 225 cases off of this because those are the blocks that I have taken. I sell fruit to other, Vangie buys fruit off of Brewadair. So does that doesn't matter, but
it's a pretty important site, and Veeder is a kind of home to a lot of very famous vineyard designates. Now, what I would like to do real quick, Jason, is just kind of talk people that are live with us now. They've got the wine in the glass. We can see that, sometimes leaning the glass over, looking through the glass onto a white piece of paper. Sometimes I have my watch face on when I can look use my watch face. As I look through this thing is absolutely as dark as wine can get. It's truly purple to the rim. You don't see any watery edge there. This is a youthful, dark, deep, very, it's even the color tells you there's some quality, and there's a color and concentration. You can see the quality. It's almost glass staining, which is fully concentrated. And as you swirl this around and go to smell, there's some really, iconic Napa Valley smells. There's some very iconic Cabernet and smells, but then you can also start talking about iconic mountain fruit, iconic Mount Veeder. If you taste enough Cabernets from the Napa Valley, you might even be able to nail this as a Mount Veeder wine, just because of the little specifications that you become very accustomed to when you're tasting a lot of Napa Valley wines. And I'm not able to say I could taste some of the Chris Carpenter influence here, but I kind of think I do. I mean, there's like an endurance. His wines really enjoy having time in the bottle, and this wine is wound nice and tight and to evolve at a very slow pace. And that's really something that I can see the influence here.
Well, one of the things that most definitely Chris is was not only just a great teacher and a great friend, but really good at emphasizing. It really is kind of the less is more approach. And what's interesting about these three vintages is when we took over this vineyard, when me and Mariano Navarro, who's my vineyard manager, who used to be the vineyard manager for Cardinal, La Jolla, and La Joda, respectively, he started his own business. So when I went out and started evidence, I brought Mariano in to help me farm the vineyards that I'd be working with. This is a great example of a vineyard that we took over. 16 was the first vintage off of Brewdare. 17 was our second vintage, and we dealt with a lot of drama, like I said, because of the fires. But what this is as we step up from 17 to 18 to 19, you will see, the protocol for what I do in this winemaking process is very much a less is more approach. I want this wine to express the fruit that it's made out of. I don't want it to express the wood of the barrel that it's been. So it's really about balance. And I use the analogy often of if you think of salt and sugar in those things in the culinary world, it doesn't sound like that's a great combination, but in the proper balance, salt and sugar is a beautiful thing together. Wine is kind of the same thing. It's the balance of the tannic structure of the fruit that it's made out of, but also the true star in Napa is the dirt that the fruit grows in. It isn't the winemaker per se. It's a science. And in the world of science, there are two worlds that we operate in, the knowns and the unknowns. And in that group of knowns, we essentially assign a numeric value to all the things that we know we can identify and that we can adjust as winemakers within our recipe. And then the protocol just sort of states itself. The unknowns are what Mother Nature gives us to deal with, the product that is hanging on the vine, and then of course the climate and how it's affected everything. I have no 2020 vintage by virtue because of the fires and the smoke and the issues that went on there. And I sent you a photograph, I think yesterday, I'm sorry it was so late, but I sent you a photograph of a perfect grape cluster. And that's what I had to walk away from. I couldn't make wine out of it. Because
20 was going to be great if we didn't have a fire, but
it would have been perfect. I mean, it could have been close to the most perfect vintage that I've ever had the luxury to work on wine with. When I don't know if you remember that picture, but it's just an unbelievable grape cluster. I wish there was some way I could have stuffed it or something.
I didn't get to make wine in 20 either, so it's therapy for me not to have any photos. It might be a good idea to throw that one away.
Yeah. Well, I think it'll be a pretty good example of that. You put these little things together, you will see 18, same vineyard, same protocol, essentially the same everything. Has a little bit more Malbec in it because the Malbec yield was higher.
Hold on one second, but before we start talking about 18,
yeah,
17 in the glass, I'd love to get the folks involved that are with us tonight.
Please,
and maybe have some comments from them, and we'll take our spotlights off and just allow everybody a chance. If you have something you'd like to say or comment, and then I'm going to give you guys a minute, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I smell and taste in the 17, and then I'm going to take you through the process that I use to score wines. I have scored wines for a couple of different publications through the years. And I'm going to tell you the process I would use to evaluate this wine and see how close we get to that. I believe this was the 97 point wine, Jason, if
this is a 96 point.
96, okay.
It literally, if I could just quickly say, this is an example. 17, 18, 19 is a great example of a happy vineyard. I didn't change a whole lot from my winemaking perspective. But the fruit, the vineyard, when we took it over, got healthier every year because of the changes we made in irrigation, the way that we leafed and cropped. And it's just every year it just went from 95 to 96 to 97 to 98 to 99. It's literally a perfect numeric value associated to just a vineyard getting happier and healthier and producing better quality fruit. And that's why I was excited when you brought this up as an idea. Like, oh, this is great. It's just step, 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 step. And it truly is. It's just about a happy vineyard and healthy fruit.
And learning how it responds, right? And
Right.
having the wisdom that your vineyard team has to know, when to drop fruit and green harvest and pull leaves, and maybe they're anti plow. I'm not sure their philosophies there, but there's a lot of different philosophies in farming and a lot of science behind it now too. But what do you guys think about this 17? You guys have it in the glass. Lisa, I see you there. Do you have this wine in with you today, Lisa?
I do. Apparently, I ordered 2 tasting kits.
All right.
I'm not sure why, but I have 2. I'm quite enjoying it.
Yeah.
It's not being very articulate at the moment, but I have officially retired from 32 years with LA Unified today.
Yeah, this is the day, huh?
Wow. All right.
All right. We've been waiting for this.
We've been waiting. I'm still on. Emails haven't been cut off, so I'm like, oh my god, I still have to email these people and this. So
Let them know. Yeah.
I graduated LA Unified.
did you? Where'd you go?
Taft High School.
Oh, lovely. Yeah,
Woodland Hills.
yeah, absolutely.
Moved out to LA to live with my dad from Chicago because that was a better opportunity for sports and an athletic scholarship. And I went Taft and Woodland Hills.
Yeah, they have a good
You ever,
program.
back in Chicago, did you ever run around with any of the Bonacorsis?
Yeah, that guy owes me money. You got his number?
Well,
No, I didn't.
yeah, there was a very famous sommelier in Los Angeles, Michael Bonacorsi, who was from Chicago. His brother is a big musician in Chicago. And I knew Michael when he was at Spago. Unfortunately, he passed away from a coronary aneurysm, even though he had like 0% body fat and 6-pack abs and was like a fashion model. He died a very young man, and it was quite a tragedy. And he was a great winemaker also, by the way. And
Where's the good guys?
yeah, so if you ever go to Chicago and run into a Bonacorsi, they're all over the place. And they worked in the restaurants too. So that's my Chicago story. I went to Chicago not knowing that, and there was a guy standing behind the bar. I go, man, you look a lot like Michael Bonacorsi. He goes, I'm his brother. Adam and Melissa, you guys are there. You tasting with us tonight? And I see Setsuko in Japan. She's not tasting with us. We did not get her set, but
Adam and Melissa are muted.
yeah,
There we go. We just unmuted. Yeah, it's lovely, and I did notice right away it doesn't have there isn't a big oaky influence. It really tastes like the fruit to me, and the terroir, obviously. But it's lovely, balanced. I just think it's fantastic. It's my first time tasting your wine.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It's important for me. I really like to point out for folks, the reality is oak and and why we traditionally make the wine in this old school, old world way in the new world is because there's a definite benefit of it. It isn't to impart oak flavor, okay? Tannins and wine is a tannic beverage, like coffee, like tea. You are steeping things in warm liquid to extract the tannins from the tea leaves and the stems and the seeds and the coffee beans and all the wine is exactly the same thing. Tannins are represented in 2 groups. You have sweet tannins and you have bitter tannins. We use oak, and specifically French oak, because we're extracting the sweet tannins from the wood to counterbalance the bitter tannins in the grape skins. It's not to add oak flavor, it's to balance it. So it isn't just this tannic, brain bomb that, blackens your teeth and gives you an immediate headache. We want something that's approachable and soft around the edges and really fills over and spills over on the sides of that flavor palette and gives you a really balanced, fruit-forward wine that really shines what it's been made out of and not adding something that isn't. So that's my approach, our approach, but my approach and from my mentorship is very much the balance of utilizing wood for what it does for us in that scientific process. It isn't to add a flavor.
But that being said, Jason, how much new wood is this?
80%.
80%. So that is considered a large amount of new wood, but when you're working with really good fruit,
Right.
you can put it in a new wood barrel and not have the wine come out oak, quote unquote, oaky.
Right.
It's there for a period of time and you know when to pull it out and you've got the right toast level. And it's all about finding those type of barrels that kind of pair well with the style, the varietal, the appellation, and certainly you've probably got some ideas. And is there a single forest or something like that? I mean, that literally when we're making wine today, sometimes a coop, if you're, especially if you're making a large amount of wine, you're using an assortment of barrels from an assortment of coopers.
Right.
I'm assuming this is 100% French oak.
100%.
100% and 80% new. And what was the total time in wood? Is that 18 months?
Yeah, 18 months at max. And then I switch over to neutral.
Okay.
So I'm not imparting anything any longer. I mean, it really kind of has become, you know, Ian, as I've gotten deeper into this process, like I say, I started in 16. I've got, you know, I still have my 21s and 22s to go in the bottle. I've become much more assured in myself to make decisions based on flavor rather than gauges or numbers. I always use my refractometer in the vineyard to look at my sugar levels and see where the fruit was. I rely more on just tasting the fruit because you do it long enough, you kind of know where your sugars are, and that's something that can be easily manipulated just through dilution, basically. It's really about where the fruit is and what the fruit tastes like. Yeah, so it really is about balance. If I start really getting into it after about 12 or 14 months in a barrel, when I'm getting ready to do my second to last, if not last, rack and back, I have a pretty good idea how much longer I'm going to leave it on the wood at that point, because I don't want to impart too much oak into the wood.
Fantastic. Ken, thank you for your comment, your compliment. Ken is a Francophile, and he comes to a lot of our French dinners. I see you typing away there. Black fruits over tannin. It's a description. I like that. And I'm going to just talk about what I tasted in the 17, and we're going to move into the 18. But when we look at this, and you know, we talk about Cabernet, the markers for Cabernet and the tasting and the smelling, and you know, you can really see that this is kind of lining up to be an optimally decisive Napa Valley high quality production. When you talk about high quality, you're typically not talking about high volume, but low yield. It's displayed by the character of the wine, and you're probably getting what, maybe 2.5, 3 tons per acre off of a vineyard with farming like this, just based on the number of vines you plant and the hillside and the type of vigor that you get on a hillside like a Mount Veeder.
Right.
So you get these low yielding, fairly expensive fruits. You probably, you know, and then I'm not going to ask you how much you paid for this fruit, but it's a lot, and it's you know, 5 figures plus per ton to get fruit like this in the Napa Valley, and there are vineyards that could charge 20,000 a ton for fruit of this quality. So
even more, actually. Yeah. Dr. Crane and Beckstoffer, Tokalon, places like that are in the 23 to 25 range now.
Amazing.
Which is just, yeah, it's great when you think you're making 75 cases of wine.
And one of the things I think you know you're in the Napa Valley almost pretty quickly with this wine in the glass, just because you smell that wonderful layer of the kind of the dusty bench character that is Napa Valley. You got the cassis, the eucalyptus, oak, vanilla, kind of a toasted coconut cream element in the background, but really, really faint. And those tannins are really fine, and but in balance with all the other information, that really makes me think that this wine has a really long runway. It is enjoyable now, but this wine is absolutely built to age as long as you want it to go, 10, 20 plus years. Some people like more fruit orientation. So those people, you don't tell them to drink the wine when it's 20 years old. You drink it now. And some people like it to start to break down a little bit and show some of that evolution. We call them secondary or tertiary type of aromas that you start to smell in a wine that's aging in the bottle in a long, slow period. And this wine can unwind a little bit, relax a little bit, maybe even broaden out a little bit in the bottle, and give you even more of a plush, softer feel. But in this youthful time, at 5, 6, 7 years of age, this wine's showing you, hey, I am built to last, because this wine's 2017 is coming up here on 6 years old, and it's still a baby. And that really is going to give you a nice set of confidence right there, that probably year 10 is when you start to see things just start to shift a little bit and give you a little bit of a more advanced type of look at things.
The relationship between blue fruit and black fruit and red fruit, or fruit forward wines, Viter for me is very blue and black fruit oriented. And what I've gotten deeper and deeper, and I think what you'll start picking up on as we move forward into 18 and 19, I have this extraordinary attachment to like moist soil, forest floor kind of characteristics, that stuff that they talk about, the graphite and it's complete. This vineyard is completely surrounded with redwood trees and oak. There's not a lot of scrub oak. There's very little. The alluvial fan aspect on that, and the Mayacamas with Viter is a tectonic mountain range, so there's not a whole lot of volcanic influence. So it has the soil complex structure there. It doesn't retain moisture the same way that volcanic and clay-based type of loamy soils tend to retain moisture and keep fruit hydrated more. Whereas on Viter, these are really stressed out vines, and they have very small grapes and really thick skins, and those skins are just pushing forward all of everything. I've always had this theory that when a lot of my photography does it, where I fill a wine glass with water and put it on an end post in a vineyard. And what it does is it inverts the imagery around it and refracts everything in that glass that's around that vineyard. And I've always thought everything you see in that glass is influencing your fruit that's growing in that vineyard, because you can see it. And I believe that that's what's going on here in Viter. It just screams of like fern and moisture. Every berry arrives at the winery on the back of a monarch butterfly and a little troll, that's putting it into the crusher to stemmer. There's that just fairies and craziness. Mount Viter is a magical place. There's no doubt about it. And I'm very lucky to have access to this fruit. And I think you'll see the changes in the next 2 bottles, or the next 2 tastes.
One question before I get into Mary's question. Lees. So the wine goes through into fermentation. We harvest around, let's say optimistically, it's the end of September, first week of October, probably in September. It might have been first week of September in 2017.
It was second day. It was October 2nd. All 3 of these wines are harvested in October.
Okay, great, cool. It's such a different world than Zinfandel. There was no, weird. Yeah. But so you get that wine to the crusher to stemmer, you destem, you put on sorting tables, probably vibrating tables, getting rid of any kind of nibs and stuff like that. You doing a lot of eyeball inspection, or using a laser sorting table?
The irony is, so Cardinal Lacoya has really stepped things up a bunch. So we've got our crew of gals that stand and hand sort. Then it goes through a vibrating latriere and gets rid of all the little jacks and the little guys that we want. And then it goes in through an optical sorter with lasers and all of this. I look at it as like, I made some pretty decent wine by taking someone else's garbage and fermenting it. So when we get to the laser sorter, the optical sorter thing, I'm like, wow, it must just be something great to have a $1 billion business owned by a small family to be able to afford a piece of machinery like that. But they're making a lot of wine through it. And I agree that it does a very good job. But what I see, the stuff that it's putting out, my immediate gut reaction is, I can make wine from that. Why are we throwing that away?
Second label.
Yeah.
Jason, so let me explain, if you haven't seen this thing go to work, the fruit is perfectly laid out like a single layer on a table. The berries all actually have a position on the table, and the computer reads the table. It knows exactly what a perfect Cabernet berry is supposed to look like. And then it scans that fruit looking for imperfections, sunburn, size, cuts, weird things that could cause a wine to go down in quality. And it knows, oh, that's in position F92, and it blows position F92 off the table. And it does it in like a pop, it looks like popcorn popping off the table, and yet you still catch that fruit, and you're able to do like a second wine with it. And a lot of wineries do that because it is expensive fruit, and it just got way more expensive because it just blew 15% of it off the table.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm lucky enough to do, have access to a piece of machinery like that. So this wine truly is the result of utilizing the absolute best of what I have to work with, for sure.
And that's how we get to that level. When you go out to dinner and you go to a nice steakhouse, they're going to give you a nice steak for the money. But if you go to a Michelin star restaurant and it's time for them to serve you the A5 Wagyu from Japan, that was rated A5. That's like the laser sorting table of steak, rating that at a super high level, and you pay for that. And it all comes down to, what is that quality worth, and how much can you pay for it? And so those are the steps. So now I got to answer Mary's question, then we're going to move on, Jason.
Sure.
How do you get to a score of 95, 96 points? And I'm just going to give you the formula real quick. It sounds maybe overly simplistic, but you don't just put it in your mouth and come up with this is pretty good, I'm going to give that 95 points. You really need to have an approach that'll get you to the same score if you taste it today, or 2 weeks from now, or 2 months from now, or 2 years from now. And in fact, I think if the same reviewer were to review this wine again, he might even elevate that score, because it is got time in the bottle, and it does kind of give you a little bit of a better look, once the wine's in the bottle for a little while. Some wines actually go down in score after they're in bottle for a little while.
The 96 vintage is a perfect example of that. 97 came, blew it away, thought, oh, vintage of the century, everything's great, and everyone poo-pooed the 96s. And the 96s are the ones that are actually showing better now with age, because they had a lot of green characteristics and pyrazines in them, and they aged really well and are tasting monster great right now. And then 2001 happened. And,
yeah, 98 was like undrinkable to people when it first came out, and now if you have 98s in your cellar and you open them up, you're probably pretty happy.
Exactly, because everyone was so spoiled by 97, and 98s are just killing it.
So we're going to take the 100-point scale and we break it into 15 points for color, and you got to have enough experience to say, okay, what does a 15-point color wine look like? Well, quite honestly, maybe not tonight. This is like really close to 15 out of 15. Let's say we slice 0.5 points off of that and make it 14 and a half. Okay. And then, so that's our color score. Then you go into aroma, and on a 100-point scale, 25 points for aroma. So we smell this wine. We think about the cassis, the eucalyptus, that vanilla, coconut, toasted custard cream. We think about all that stuff, and we look at it and we say, I really like this. It's got great definition. It's really right on. And I'm going to be pretty strong on that and give this a 24 out of 25 on the aroma. And even that's being a little harsh. So I'm taking a whole 1.5 off already. Body, 25 points. You put that wine in your mouth, you feel, we see a little bit of that too. You see that concentration, you see a little bit of that, but you put it in your mouth and you feel that wine in your mouth, and you see how rich and how concentrated. Those are marks of quality. And you can also see that there's great structure to this wine. The tannin, it's almost like you have to taste in 3D. It's not just how it feels like weight and oily, but you have to see the architecture, taste the architecture, feel that how well built it is and strong it is. And out of 25, I'm really close to 24 points or so there. So I'm now 2.5 points off of a 100-point scale. We get to overall score. This is where it takes kind of a little bit more of an artist to extrapolate or kind of stand on a box and say, overall, out of 35 points, what am I going to give this wine? Is it 35? Is it 34? Is it 33? And you kind of have to have reasons for why overall you're going to give this wine the score that you give it. And you might mark off a point or so, because perfect is really hard for people to get to. So reviewers have a hard time stamping a wine with a 100-point mark. They have to be really comfortable, because everyone's going to look at the wine and go, "Oh, dude, you gave that 100 points. That means it's flawless." I would have liked to have seen this wine have a little of this or that. And there are wines that get there, but to get up into that 98, 97 point mark, you got to be really impressive, because the overall score is really where some you can take points off pretty easily, or you can leave them on there pretty well. And I might be, 34 out of 35, or 33 and a half. Let's make the math easy, out of 35. So 33 and a half, that's a 1.5 added to my 2.5 points I already took off. I'm at 96 points on that 2017 wine, using those reasons right there. And then I'd have to, be able to justify why I even took a point off, but I don't want to do that. But I was just kind of backing up how we got to 95, 96 on that 2017, which I think they were being pretty critical, and maybe there's room in there for that wine to be somewhere in the 98-point range. All right, let's go into 2018, Jason. And I put it in my glass, and we smell what a difference a year makes. I mean, 17 was a very warm year, and there were a couple of weekends in 17 in the early part of September that pushed temperatures it spiked like 118, 119 degrees for a weekend. In that range. Photosynthesis shut down. So you got these small little berries sitting in that heat, and you got some really special ripeness in 17, kind of coaxed the wine along. And I really think 17 was a little underrated as a vintage in some ways, because I really think long term the vintage is going to be a champ. I love what it did to the fruit. It just kind of took everything that we do in California and plussed it a little bit.
Yeah, everything took longer in 18, which is a virtue when it comes to making wine, including growing fruit to make wine out of. The hang time was longer in 18, a couple of weeks. And
the earlier bud break, right?
Earlier bud break, but the fruit set was very balanced and the fruit matured all, yeah, where we want to get, just to simplify, when we're looking at how fruit, when things are flowering, and then when fruit set happens and the way the fruit matures, in a perfect world, we want clusters that all have berries that are matured and the same size and matured at the same rate. But the climate, Mother Nature can change that by virtue of hydration and rain, by heat or cold. It changes all of these factors. And of course, grapevines are very reactive plants. They are very reactive. They tell you what they're feeling, what they're doing very quickly in a very short period of time. 18, things went slowly. We had a lot of water early on in January and February. And then the fruit set happened and it was very even. And then things slowed down and we didn't have the extraordinary heats that we often experience and set, in later September and sometimes in that Indian summer in October. It just kind of lingered in the 90s and things moved really slowly. And like anything, patience is a virtue. And the fact that the fruit got to hang longer and mature slowly, it really, I think, again, use that word balance, just produced really balanced wines. Just great extraction, great color, all of the fruit. You don't want those clusters that have, raisins at the bottom and little green guys at the top and, a mishmash of all of these things. You want just a perfect cluster of fruit that it gives you, every grape's the same size and the same density. And that's what the thing was. And that machine we were just talking about didn't kick out a whole lot of berries that year. Everything is just good.
That's the mark. And also in a vintage like 17, when you have weather things and stuff that happen along the way, and I'm just going to go back to Zinfandel again. Sometimes we get what's called chicks and hens, and you get these big grapes next to these little teeny berries that are basically seedless little berries, and they're like little sugar cubes. And so when we make our Zin, we take the berry, but we leave the little hen out of the mixture to keep our sugars lower, so we don't have elevated alcohol. In a vintage like 18, where we had this amazing homogeny, wonderful growing season without the heat events, it was also a little larger yields, I think, in 18 in general. There you go. There's your cluster picture. Back it up just a little bit. It's a little bit. Little
it's not coming in.
No, yeah, it doesn't. But the in 18, I think prettier conditions, without quite the peaks and the valleys of 17. So it's maybe not as exciting of a vintage. Plus, I remember harvest seemed to go on forever in 18. It was like you could have picked on the 1st of October or the 20th of October and probably been pretty much in the same spot.
Well, Napa, there's a huge differentiation between valley floor and mountain fruit. And those things, and then you throw Coombsville in the mix, which, as you know, is the other AVA that I'm working in. And that's a totally different ball game because of the cool nights and the San Pablo Bay and all of that. That's the future of Napa, I have to say. But yeah, it was just a longer. Everything took longer, and people were taking. Jason Woodbridge is very famous for just taking big risks and let it hang. We'll bring it in at Thanksgiving, and he does all of these different crazy things and hovers helicopters over vineyards and waters and does whatever drama. But he does a pretty good job of what he has to work with. So 18, I don't know. I don't know if you're picking up on it, but for me, just immediately the 18 is just screaming earth, and there's so much more. This seems to be so much more complex, deeper, richer, broader. The spectrum of the flavors of this wine, this wine continues to open up in the glass as you swirl it around. I don't even think the two compare, quite frankly, personally. But that's the thing, Ian, with scores, the subjectivity of it. It's just a person's opinion who is utilizing the scale that you just spelled out for us to talk about. And you hopefully they agree with what you've done and the choices you've made and give you a good one. I mean, with respect to creating a brand and what it's like to market it and gain traction and get it in front of people and hope that they like it. It's very similar to being an actor. It's very similar to anything. We're just producing a product and asking somebody to like it. So when it comes to scoring on that, in that scale that you just spelled out, it's a sense memory exercise. It's understanding what you know, what you like and what you don't like, and balancing those things out and pointing it out. And again, balance, balance, balance. It's all just about balance, taking what you have to work with and balancing it, and not, pushing. You don't want a 17% alcohol wine if you don't have some sugar and some acid and some zin or something behind it to fatten it up and back it up. You have a 17% alcohol cab, you're probably gonna not like that much.
Right. I want to go back to a question I asked you on the last wine, and I don't think I got the answer because I kept talking. But we put the juice in the barrel, and we go into fermentations. We're talking about fermentation in barrel, right? Are you using barrel fermentation?
I am not barrel. I'm not fermenting in the barrel. I'm fermenting in tank, and then I go into a barrel when it's dry.
So are you taking lees with you, or are you leaving it in the tank?
So lees are going to exist regardless. So if the wine seems like it needs nourishment with niacin and B12 and B15 and the things that exist, and that lees are really more about, we will transfer lees from one fermentation into another fermentation to help it complete. In white wine production, we use lees to create mouthfeel and do batonnage and stir the lees and suspend them. But even when the tank goes dry and you drain that tank and then go to press and add that back into the tank, that's what we put back into the barrel. And by virtue of gravity and time in a barrel, there will still be yeast cells suspended in that wine that will settle down to the bottom of the barrel. And every 3 or 4 months, we do what's called a rack and return. We take all the wine out except for the bottom inch of that barrel. And that's where all of those suspended yeast cells are now lying. They're down in the bottom of the barrel. And that continues to happen through that process quarterly or every 3 or 4 months or so over the course of 18 to 24 months. And that's essentially the only filtration this wine sees is gravity. So I'm not pushing this through any pads or any filters or anything. Gravity is doing everything. In the end, what I like to try and point out to people is wine is a beautiful example of what's called colloidal suspension. Grape skins, fall apart and macerate, and what you're looking at when you look at a glass of red wine is a cloud of minuscule grapes skin particulates that are suspended in this liquid that's thinner than water. So the solid particulates are completely balanced and literally suspended in that environment because of the environment they're in. They're opposite and equal. So over time, when you look at this wine in 10 years, and it will be a lot less opaque because those little particulates will have continued to decompose and fall apart, if you will, and start to settle in the bottom of the bottle or in the bottom of wherever it is being stored, and become less of a tannic influence, and the fruit comes more forward. I think that's where we look at the peak of a wine. But I think that consumers, and I know myself included in this, I like young wines, Ian. I like tannins. I don't know that I'm going to love this wine as much as I do right now in 15 years. I'm sure it will show well and do well, but I like the youth and the young tannic influence that young wines bring, and how much they change and evolve in the glass when you pour them.
And I hear exactly what you're saying, and I think 18 was, like we talked about, kind of a prettier vintage that didn't have quite the extremes of 17. I think that this wine shows there's a purity in this wine that I think in 17 has got kind of a, there's like in 17, there's some like battle scars.
Yeah, yeah.
In 17 and there it's muscular. 17 is really machismo and macho, and it's got the tannins are powerful. And the reason I asked about Lee's for especially on the 17 was because it felt that mouthfeel felt like it had some additional Leesy elements to it, and that also kind of pushes out that longevity of the wine. Whereas this one, if I were to compare it to clothing, the 17 was kind of like a wool shirt or blanket, and this one's like a silk blanket. It's got kind of there's like a sheerness and a prettiness and an accessibility in 18 that I think rewards your desire to have earlier drinking wines a little bit more. I think it's a little more ready to go, although I do think it has a wonderful runway ahead of it. I don't think it needs time, whereas 17 I think does kind of tell me, I think I'm going to like this better personally.
Yeah.
Bottle age, whereas this one I could pop it right now and be like, look at this, look at this one, and the wine's kind of screaming at you, look at me.
Yeah. Well, and the differentiation is not only just the time, it's 2 weeks longer before harvest. The yields were higher this year because of how slow the growth was and more balanced. And the blending element, I did not co-ferment this wine. I fermented them separately because they did not mature at the same time. And it has almost double the Malbec blending element. So there's about 16% Malbec in the 18.
When did you blend that? Do you blend it somewhere along the way or at the very end? Or when?
It's about 6 months, but it kind of depends. I'm bottling my 21s in late January, and I'm just doing my blends on that right now.
Yeah,
So,
that's the way it is, right? And you
sometimes
probably
it's a couple
tasted them
months.
like 15 times already, and you can't really decide on the
Yeah.
blend until you see it.
Well, and that's just the thing, and that's kind of the subjectivity aspect about critics and scores and what getting somebody's opinion is like, we've all had that experience where I've tasted a wine that I've heard so many people talk up about, and I was let down by it because it wasn't what I expected. Just like going to a movie 4 months after it's been let out and everyone's, talking great shit about it. And then you go to it, you're like, well, this isn't as good as I thought. And then you revisit the wine 2 months later and you're like, oh my God, this wine is amazing. There are so many factors involved that it's tough to understand to take it seriously, but we rely on it. Listen, we're both proprietary, and a product that we create, that we sell and we present to people and say, please like me. But there is a give and take to that. Sometimes they're gonna like it better than others, and then it's gonna switch. You're gonna wind up switching places and not liking it as much 2 months later, for a variety of reasons: attitude, what you've eaten, all of that stuff. I mean, it's pretty simple. But if you can get a consistency of like every time you try it, it's good, then that's where we're all driving to get to. And I think that's where I am with evidence right now. The new thing for me is I actually just I'm doing Spring Mountain this year for the first time.
Wow.
Jumping in on Spring Mountain. And that will be awesome because not only they're both in my Camus, but they're very different ABAs from one another.
As we know, Cabernet, to be called Cabernet in California, it has to be at least 75% Cabernet. The blend in 17, you said some
8% Malbec.
And is that the only other variety used in 17?
The only one, yeah. There's 4 rows of Malbec on Brewed Vineyard where I am. I'm the only one that wanted it and thought it would be a great virtue to use. Because there's so little of it, it's not something that anyone else wanted, so I just took it over. It's not even something that's on the board to sell. And so it is part of what I use as the blending element here. The Coombsville wine, I have ironically 4 rows of Cab Franc, so I use that as my blending element because I'm the only person on that vineyard.
Nice.
But yeah, and then, the 19s have a little less Malbec, but the cab presented so well in 19 that I was almost ready to just do 100% cab and not even deal with the Malbec. But I didn't have enough of the Malbec to rationalize bottling 35 cases of Malbec. So
Right.
I used it in the blend, and I'm very happy that I did. I think it's balanced out really well. Malbec was kind of that forgotten Bordeaux varietal, I mean, everyone's poo-pooed. It's gone here. Obviously, Chile and Argentina have gone gangbusters with Malbec. But it is you as a Zin producer, and you and I share that passion in Zinfandel. I still love Zinfandel. I just love making Zinfandel as a wine. It's just really fun to work with because it's just different. It's different than Bordeaux's. And Malbec is kind of that forgotten little animal there that is a great addition. Merlot, Merlot sideways screwed up everything for Merlot. I'm not sure why or how, but in the incredible depth of reach that opinion from that movie, what it did to Merlot. There's a lot of people who are starting to plant Merlot up here again. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes.
It is a trend. It's starting to go back the other way.
Yeah.
It's not booming back the other way, but it's moving enough that people are taking notice. So we're going to move from 18 to 19 here into glass number 3, but this is very subjective, where you fall between 17 and 18. But I do think that the prettiness of this 18 fruit and the fruit focus and I can really identify the fruit of 18, and it's so pretty, and it's got a really wonderful drink me now character. So at this moment, I'm like thinking, okay, 18 is pretty special, and I'm probably in that same score range, maybe a point higher with that 18. So let's go now to the third wine, the 19. And things keep getting better for you. You keep getting better scores. And this 19 was the highest scored wine that you had released. And when we look at 17, 18, and 19, it's a wonderful, 16 is actually a great vintage too. 16, 17, 18, 19. Maybe yields were a little lower in 19, a little bit
Higher
for you.
Higher, but Ian, that's more of a personal reflection on my vineyard. Like I said, at that point by 19, I'd had 4 years of farming on this vineyard that I took over that wasn't in very good shape when we got on board. So it's happier. 19 is the show. It's the thing. It's where the vineyard is starting to express itself and going, well, whatever you're doing, we're really liking it. And a lot of that it's very simple. So it's in a very hostile environment. You drive up Mount Veeder, you go on Mount Veeder Road, you get damn near to the top of it, and then you peel off onto a dirt road for 2 miles. Wow. And roll back onto a dirt road you're above Hess, you're above La Jolla, you're above all of these different areas that are really highly respected, and you peel off and you show up at the Bruyere Vineyard, and it's 3 terraces. The first terrace I call the Widowmaker because it is a really steep angled hill. The dirt is like powder. It's difficult to even walk up, much less drive anything up or anything. But it is where the previous owners that were starting to slack, they hung their hydration, the irrigation hydration stuff about a foot off the ground. And it's this black plastic tubing that everybody utilizes to deliver small amounts of water to their vines. But being in that environment where they are, there's hares, foxes, lynxes, mountain lions, turkeys, coyotes. I mean, there's deer, there's everything up there. And a lot of those suspended irrigation lines got broken just by a hair running through it and snapped. So when we were doing any kind of watering or hydrating the fruit, so many of those were broken that a lot of vines were being starved of water, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but we weren't things were not balanced. It's another word that I use. These vines were not all getting fed the same amount at the same time. And after the fires, since we lost a lot of the irrigation and stuff that burned through down the roads, and to replace all of that, and decided to just lay the irrigation hoses on the ground so they don't break. So we're now dealing with fruit and vines that have been in a happier environment for 5 years, 4 years, 5 years, and really showing that. I'm really excited. The last couple of harvests, I've jumped in at Cardinal to help them get over the hump, because 21 and 22, again, everything's coming in all at once. And I'm the old guy. They call me the harvest dad because I'm working with all these 22 and 23-year-old interns, from Italy and Argentina and France and blah, blah, blah. But it's just, I can see what has happened in this vineyard, and I'm really excited. I'm really excited about it. It has very little, it had more to do with what we had control over and how we could adjust to Mother Nature, which we have zero control over. So that it's kind of exciting to know that just by virtue of planting some ground growth like wild mustard and hydrating these things in a way that is very controlled and governed, so that everything's getting the same amount of hydration. Then I got a higher yield in 2019, where a lot of people got less fruit than the previous 2 vintages. So there you go. Once again, I got 100+ cases more in 2019 than either of my 3 previous vintages on the same vineyard, just by virtue of making some changes.
Amazing. Well, as we look at this wine, I think it's probably the darkest of the 3 wines too. I mean, they were all dark, but to me, this one's even like more glass staining. Maybe it's just the fact I'm using the same glass again and again and again. this glass is, as I spin it around the glass, you can see that purple is just so intense, and the nose is really giving you some love here. And this is what I really like about mountain fruit, and the definition that we're getting here. We're getting that just that a little bit more accentuated and more complexity, I think, in the 19, with some more smell, more aroma categories here. Just hints, subtle little hints of herbaceousness, showing in its youth right now. Maybe 2 years from now it won't be there, but I get just that little bit, and more roasted coffee, and really some fantastic savory things. But then the fruit skins are just screaming out the top, like you just peeled a plum, and you get that really wonderful skin character. I grew up with a plum tree in my backyard, and I just love that about wine. And so there's so much going on here, and there's a real joy button on this 19 too. It's like, wow.
Well, one of the steps of making wine that not a lot of people talk about, and I sort of see it as, one of the factors, one of the areas within the process that kind of weeds the men from the boys, because it's a strategy, and it's, again, a sense memory exercise. But real quick, for the people who are with us that don't maybe not know how wine is made or what fermentation is all about, but when a tank goes dry and your wine the sugars have been consumed, the yeast have done their jobs or whatever, you drain that wine into an empty tank, and then you dig out all of the solids and you go to the press. And the press is an incredibly important step in this process, because you're taking all the solids that are left back in that tank, which is the skins, the seeds, the stems, and you put it into whatever kind of press you're using. I use a basket press. I think I sent you a photograph of me on top of the cake last year. And that stage of the winemaking process is really important, because if you don't press that stuff and add that wine wine back to the tank of wine that you've just drained, if you don't go deep enough, you're robbing yourself of certain elements. But if you go too deep into the press, you're then adding elements that are a derogation or derogatory to the process and will make your wine worse, not better. So there's a very fine line that decides when that time is. And that time is when you're standing there as a winemaker, as the plunger is pushing down on this stack of grape skins and this juice is squeezing out from the basket and running into a sump somewhere you're going to add back. If you go too far, you start squeezing the seeds and the stems, and you start getting the pyrazines, which are magical in Zinfandel, but borderline, a curse with Bordeaux varietals if you go too far. So it's knowing when to cut that off, because you're not only extracting flavor and juice and stuff that you've just made, but you're extracting tannins and color and all of the stuff that you need to, again, make a balanced wine. If you drink a really cheap wine, it hasn't gone through malolactic fermentation, which is $3 chuck or $2 chuck, whatever.
Basket pressing is sort of the more.
Who was that?
I'm sorry about that. I was trying to find a picture of a basket press, and it's a video. But that's what it looks like. You put the fruit inside there, and the baskets, the wood planks are about, I don't know, ½ inch apart.
Yeah. Do you have that picture I sent you yesterday of me on the cake?
I wasn't able to get it onto a slideshow in time.
I'm sorry.
Send it to my phone, and I can't get them out of my phone because my email's not working on my phone. So I'm just having all kinds of technical things. But
that's exactly what I utilize. That's exactly, use that exact basket, that exact tray.
And what's amazing is that this technology was like very popular long ago and has been held on to by certain parts of the world, and now has come back as like the choice way for real gentle pressing. They use this in Champagne, they use this in Burgundy, they use it now so not every cab producer is using a basket press.
Well, so the presses now are the wood, what you see there, everything is stainless now. So instead of that being wood, because the porosity of the wood holds, Brettanomyces is the evil thing.
Right. So it's a more modern version of it.
Right. So it doesn't get infected. It's easy to clean, all of that, but still performs the same operation without, captivating and keeping Brettanomyces or any microbial existent that could mess up your wine, which is always the evil thing in the end. But that's an incredibly important time of the winemaking process, because you're adding that wine back to that tank that you just drained, and then that's what goes into barrel. And then essentially, then you go into extremely deep press, and that's what typically what you distill and make grappa out of. You've made the alcohol, so you might as well take it out of there, which is something else I'm also starting to mess around with, because I think you're thinking it's like all this stuff I throw away. I also do a saignée on my tank after crush. After a couple of days, within 48 hours, I'll drain 3 to 6% of the liquid off to concentrate the skin to liquid ratio in the tank during fermentation. A lot of people just throw that away, which I did for the first 2 years. Well, I make a rosé now for Chris's wife, Tina, and she's got a thing called Pink Girl Rosé, and that's now made out of my Saignée wine. I'm like, why are we just dumping it down the drain? Let's ferment this stuff. That's what we do. And that's what a rosé is. It's runoff from another tank. But that's it. In discussion of the winemaking process, so few people talk about that time of going to press, because it's an incredibly important time. And I think a really definitive time of the kind of wines that we're talking about that represent this kind of structure and longevity. I'm going to lay this wine down in 25 years. This wine is going to be good. Whether it's as good as it is now or whatever, it's still going to be good and be structured enough to last. But that has a lot to do with just that one, not just the fruit I'm working with from the environment that it's in, but the press process of adding that back to that tank before it goes into barrel is incredibly important. it's easier in Zinfandel production because you can go too deep and it's still not going to get messed up, because Zinfandel in and of itself in its primitivo skeleton there will just live through it and rock on. But yeah, there you go. There's one.
It's a more
I mean,
modern.
the press the basket I use literally has the wood struts, except they're metal instead of wood. This is another version of the basket press, but it works just the same.
Right. Well, any questions from the group? And
You guys are quiet. What the heck is going on here?
they're all muted. I muted them all so we could hear you.
They're on the 19. They're halfway through their 19. Everyone's done. Adam and Melissa have something to say, I'm sure. Mary has said nothing for, come on.
Oh, she's asked plenty of good questions tonight. And thank you, Mary, for all of those good questions. If we didn't say answer anything, let us know. And I see Lisa saying how smooth this wine appears to be. And that's really another thing. It's a wonderful thing that you notice there, Lisa, because I think 40 years ago, 30 years ago, we thought, the wines had to be powerfully made and taste almost like they were bitter and to age, and we over extracted the tannin, and we really wanted to make these ageable icons. But what we've come to realize is if it tastes good and it's well made early on, it ages really pretty in a really wonderfully almost symmetric way. It tastes good in the beginning, it'll taste good 5 years, 10 years from now. If it's tasting bitter in the beginning, 10 years from now, it's really bitter.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's actually a great point. That's why I've always said, that our young wines, the reason I like young wines is because it shows what the wine is going to become, as opposed to, you want to take something and think it's just going to get better because it's older. It needs to be good from the get-go, and then it will get better. That's really the only balance is the word that I always use. It's all about balance. If it's got too much acid or too much alcohol or too many tannins or too much oak, too much of anything will throw the balance out. Everything just needs to be, and I have a numeric scale of the balance that I'm going for. And then outside of that, I'll add certain factors. Now, there are a couple of barrels of American oak in the 19 that I used as an example that I was actually going to just sell to somebody as a blending element for them. And then I thought, no, I like this. I don't mention it because it's such a small percentage, it doesn't matter, but I think it adds a subtle herbaceousness that might not have existed without it. And sometimes you get to such a small percentage of something, it's not even important to disclose that information because it was an experiment to begin with, but it may eventually become part of what your protocol is. But again, it depends on what you have to work with.
100%. Well, I hope everyone's enjoyed our tasting with Jason. We've learned a lot. And Jason, just in the closing moments here, because we're going towards an hour and a half, probably about 30 minutes longer than we intended. What would you do differently to maybe even amp any of these wines up? Was there a day that you said, maybe I shouldn't have done that, or maybe I could do this better next time? Is there anything you could have done?
Well, no, it's actually a great question, Ian, and it comes down to some of the things that we do in the cellar when we receive fruit. So not only is this 17, 18, and 19 a great expression of a happy vineyard, but each year I cold soak the wine at a lower temperature for longer.
Huh.
So when I first brought in 17, I had my tank set at blah, blah degrees. And the 18, I decided, I want more contact. I want this to move slower. I'm using, and as I said, I'm using native yeast. So does everyone, just by show of hands of who I'm looking at, when I say native yeast fermentation, who by show of hands knows what I'm talking about? Okay, so simply what that is that, there's yeast everywhere. It's in the cellar, it's on the grapes, it's all over we're working with. We have the ability to do a Petri dish test on the virility of that yeast culture, and if it's strong enough to survive the environment of fermentation. So the quick synopsis is that yeast eat sugar as their nutrients. Their waste product is alcohol, heat, and CO2. So we have to control those elements. I have to control that heat by cooling the tank down. I have to control the CO2, obviously, or I would pass out and not be able to finish making the wine by aerating the winery, all of that. And the alcohol is something that is also obviously controllable, but as the yeast consume the sugars and create the alcohol, the environment that they're in becomes more toxic. And they become more vulnerable, and they could, if it's not a proven strain of yeast that has the virility to survive that toxic environment, it dies off before it finishes its job, which is to consume all the sugars and make the alcohol and create a dry wine. So all of these wines are dry. It is more risky to utilize native yeast because you're not just adding yeast to inoculating a fermentation with the yeast to make sure that it will go through fermentation. It's risky, but that risk has the payoff because it moves slower than an inoculated tank if I add yeast to it. So which means it's in contact with the skins for longer, which means it's got more time to extract all of the flavors and all of the depth and all of the things that that fruit grew in is going into that wine. So each one of these years, but outside of the co-fermentation in 17, each year I dialed down the temperature of the cold soak on my fruit after crush between 1 and 2 degrees. So when I started at 1, by the time I got to 19, I was about 4 degrees cooler than I initially started with, which means I added an extra 2.5 days, 3 days of contact before things really kicked off. And when I turned the heat on the tank higher, so it moved. If you think about honey, cold honey is really thick and viscous, but warm honey is really thin. And you can stir it with a spoon. It's the same thing. So if you warm up the tank a little bit, things move a little faster. And it's about delegating time and how long that time is taking to do its job. So these 3 wines are a great example of just a few changes, not just co-fermentation and off the native yeast, but longer cold soaks. So 19, which is the one that got the big dog score and is getting all the attention, is the one that I set colder and allowed to be in contact with the skins longer. So the wine itself is just more complex and has a deeper flavor profile than the previous 2. And I think by virtue of that and going slightly deeper in the press.
Long-term evidence, you're gonna have a tasting room at some point, or are you
I
gonna?
do have, I actually have a tasting parlor downtown. It's a house that I split with 3 other vintners, and it's appointment only, and I host which apparently is really weird. I guess people don't get to meet winemakers here too often. I didn't realize that, but I'm hosting the tastings myself. And people are, we never get to hang out with the winemaker. This is awesome. So I started something I didn't realize was really a cool thing. But I'm a one-man dog and pony. I do everything. I shoot the photography. I make the wine. I do the sales. I do everything. And that's so in terms of me educating you on how I market and sell a ultra premium wine product out of Napa, I don't know. I'm just going for it and seeing how it goes.
Well, we definitely want to send some people your way if people are going to go to Napa Valley. So we'll talk about that. And if any of you want to go to Napa and see Jason, it'd be my privilege to connect you. Also want to just show you on the website if you want to buy these wines. And Jason, I need to ask you because I think the 17 is completely gone.
Yeah, 17 is out.
So we have the 18 and the 19 here. And if you purchase them from us tonight, you get a little additional discount. Those wines I'm ordering from Jason because we did sell everything that we got for this Zoom. So we're going to order those wines probably tomorrow. If you order any of them tonight, you get your discount on those as well. But these are really good prices already. I just give everybody a little thank you for joining the Zoom tonight. And if you want to purchase a bottle of 2 or 12 or 24, 36, whatever, we'll get those sent to us in due time. If you're not in a hurry, we can hold those for you until it's cooler, and that'll be nice. But they can come down from Jason overnight. We can get them in the cooler days. I discourage people from moving too quickly at this time as much as possible. But if you need it for a party this weekend, you let me know. So we will take orders. We'll carry the 19 evidence until it's gone. There's just a little bit of 18. So if you want to tell your friends about this or whatever, we're going to have this one on the website. The best way to find it is just go to the homepage and type in the word evidence right on the search bar, and there we go, and it'll pop up, and you'll see the 18 or the 19 is available, and we would love to be able to put you in touch with Jason in the future as well. And with that, we also just have a couple of upcoming Zooms that I want to make sure you're aware of. We Zoom every Wednesday. Next week, I'm going to the island of Madeira virtually, and we're going to be teaching people about the great wines of Madeira. The wines that we're going to be tasting are really great. This is not your grandma's Madeira that she used for cooking. Talking about some really nice 10, a 2008, a 15, and a 2001. And these wines are amazing. They need to be really experienced and explained. And I'm going to do that with pleasure. And you can find all of our Zooms at zoomintowine.com. And that takes you straight to the landing page. So you see Madeira. Then the week after that, we're doing this fantastic Cab Franc gathering, where we're going from France to Saint Ynez. France, we got 2 examples. We got a Bourgueil and a Chinon. We've got a Cab Franc from Saint Ynez from Ludi. We're going down to Paul Hobbs vineyard, single vineyard, 98 pointer from Uca Valley in Argentina. Crocker Star Cab Franc, a personal favorite, really great production. And then Bordeaux for an awesome elevated example from Chateau Certain and Pomerol. This is their second wine. And so we'll taste all of those in our flight 2 weeks from now, just on Cab Franc. Then we've got this cray gathering of German Rieslings that we put together. We sell it at Learn About Wine because it's a little different presentation. This is what we invest a lot of time in production, and so we do it a little differently. And we've got the LA Magazine behind us on this event. So we're tasting the icons of German Riesling, from Müller Couture to Zilliken to Maxine Grünhauser to Robert Veal to Selbach Oster. And these are some of their best wines. And I just can't tell you how passionate I am for drinking wines like that too. So we keep the content growing in that direction. We love the high quality stuff. And Jason, I got to tell you, these wines, for what they are at the quality levels, these wines are a deal.
Yeah, I'm a new brand, so I have trust me when I tell you, a lot of people up here have been giving me a lot of guff. We're like, you should be charging 175 or 200.
These are comparable to $200 bottles.
Yeah, and I need to. I consider my evidence and my project here with evidence as the Michael Jordan rookie card. I'm the guy that you don't know about yet, but you're gonna know about me soon. And that's gaining traction. It's happening. And I don't want to get greedy. It'll be great. I happen to be one of those people that has never really understood some of the price comparisons with some of the wines that are produced here where I live. I mean, I don't want to get too deep into it. I think somebody should be able to afford to buy a bottle of wine that's really good. I also want to succeed as a proprietor for obvious reasons, but I don't want to get greedy fast. And I need to make it approachable and get it into people's hands.
I can tell you one of the reasons why you could see 125 being a price you could live with is you're selling it yourself.
Mhm.
Once you give it to a distributor, you can add 30% more right onto that price. So there's your 175, wholesale number.
Yeah, but you understand the difference. The wholesale is, a true wholesaler FOB is half of your retail price.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in the reality, and it's a net 30 payment terms, whereas direct to consumer is immediacy. So yes, I remember back in the day when I was working for Le Cardinal and La Coya was $125 a bottle. But after a couple of 99 and 100-point scores, Jess Jackson decided to change it up, and we did the wine club, jacked the price up to 225 or whatever it was. And they lost a lot of people through attrition. They also gained more people back that wanted to be a part of it. So I
tell this to my friend who's a fantastic painter, and she sold a painting. She was really proud, and she put it up on Facebook. And I sent her a note. I said, "How much did you sell that painting for?" She goes, "I got $1,000 for that painting." I said, "What if I told you that painting was worth $10,000?"
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a relative. It's just relative. It's worth what somebody's willing to pay for it.
It is.
That's all. It's all. So
But you do, as a producer, you do need to cover your costs, your time,
Sure.
and the fact that you lost some opportunities too. Only making 200 cases, you only get 200 cases to pay your way.
Yeah.
So there, if you're going to keep at the 200 case level, over the long term, you could try to make more, but you might have to incorporate another vineyard, another production, another set of expenses, another label, and all those long expenses kind of add up. It's pretty interesting. The wine dynamic, it looks attractive as a business from the outside until you get on the inside. It's pretty tough. It's a pretty tough business.
It's very counterintuitive. I mean, a lot of people don't really look. In a perfect world, this industry is about a 20%, 23% in a perfect world net profit industry. So when you're driving up and down the valley here, you see these vineyards and these chateaus and these wineries and everything. These people were millionaires in other businesses first and then got involved in wine. There are very few old school dogs like Krug, Mondavi, Jess Jackson, or the Jackson family, or any of that, who got into it early enough where they actually made a lot of money in the wine industry. But it was a volume model. So when you're talking to somebody like me, this little guy that's like making these 200 cases of these wines that get these stupid high scores, but I don't have very much of it. You think, oh, great. Well, either way, it still operates. The way we make wine here in Napa is very traditional and old world, and it's very expensive. It's not cost effective. A brand new, French oak barrel is anywhere from $1,200 to $1,800 a piece, and it's only 23 cases of wine. So, I mean, these are passion projects. I do this. I left another industry where I made a lot of money to get involved in an industry where I love what I'm doing, and I can at least eat cereal in the morning.
You have a job too.
And you're happier.
I think so. Yeah. I mean,
You're happier. That's all that matters, is the happiness, because you can't take all the rest with you when you leave the planet.
That's true. That's true.
That's what we all can tell ourselves. Well, we are very appreciative of your time. The wine tonight was delicious, and the conversation has been fantastic. I want to thank you all for joining us. Hope you'll tell people about Jason's Wine. If you want to go visit, send me a note. I'll make sure to connect you. Buy some wine from Merchant of Wine so we can get the flywheel going with Jason, and I'm gonna be buying some wine for the website long term, but I'd love to put a couple more cases on that order with Jason and support. So thanks for your time, buddy. And
No worries. Thank you.
we're in this to win it for you. So we'll talk again.
Yeah, I hope so. Thank you guys for your time as well. So, and Ian, thanks for putting it all together. It's great. I like what you do.
It's fun. Well, thank you.
I met
guys.
you a long time ago, man, in
It's great.
Sherman Oaks at that weird mall tasting
Yeah,
thing.
I remember.
Like 2008 or something.
I had my little dog with me that time. I remember
Yeah.
that. Well, guys, Jason, it was great to reacquaint, and we thank you very much. I'd play us out with some Led Zeppelin, but then the whole video gets shut down on social media.
Well, that's the other secret, by the way, is while my wine is fermenting, Led Zeppelin is jamming through the cellar.
There you go, coursing through its veins.
One of the other secrets of my proprietary blend is Led Zeppelin.
Well, we got the let out tonight, so thank you guys very much. Have a good one. We'll talk soon. Peace
Thanks.
out.
Cheers.